Has this ever happened to you? Well, if it does, there are two good options and one really bad one. Let me explain. Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dead Barbecue, and today we're talking about what to do and how to repair your high heat gasket if you find yourself in a situation similar to me. This happened just the other day when I was getting ready to fire up my Big Joe Series 3 for a cook. In fact, I think I even have a clip here. Oh. So this brings us what to do if you find yourself in this situation. So I mentioned at the beginning, there's two okay options and one really bad option. So let's start with the really bad option. So the really bad option is just ignoring this and pretending it doesn't exist. I learned this the hard way, and I tried to continue cooking, which you can do just by placing the gasket down. But what will happen when you do this is the gasket not being attached will be exposed to some heat and it will shrink, it will tighten up, and you'll never be able to get it to match the dimensions of the base of your ceramic Kamado again, and you will need to order a brand new replacement. And these are not inexpensive. I'll put the price up on the screen. I don't want to misquote from memory, but I remember it not being cheap. And so that brings us to our two options. If cooking with it is not a good option, what can you do? So option number one, if you don't have time and you don't have a spare grill, fortunately, when this happened to me, I have a spare Kamado, but this is extremely rare circumstances. The first thing that I would do, if you absolutely have to cook, you have a brisket, pulled pork, something like that, people are coming over and you're against the deadline, if you can't repair your gasket right away, the best thing you could do is actually just pull it all the way off and set it aside and save this repair for another day when you have the time to do what we're going to do today and fix it properly. Option number two brings us to today, which is my fix it properly. And so to do this, all we need is some high heat silicone. There's a whole bunch. There's a lot of talk on Facebook groups about different brands and things like that, but you're just looking for 300 degrees Celsius or 600 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a common attribute of any high heat silicone, and this will get the job done. And so you can already tell I've started the repair process by putting some tape on the side that has not come undone yet, because with gravity, it was wanting to completely fall off. And so we're going to do this in two parts. We're going to fix the side that has already come detached, and we're going to move to the side that is just barely hanging on and get a complete repair. So I'll walk you through all that. Now, in terms of why does this happen? So every time that I've had a gasket failure, it shares one common attribute, and this is using the Dojo. Now, I did not exceed the 700 degrees maximum temperature of the Dojo, but the Dojo does something a little bit different than what our gaskets are normally subjected to. Because the gaskets are sealed between our ceramic Kamado base, they are not exceeding the 600 degrees Fahrenheit, 300 degrees Celsius that the gasket glue can take. But when you put in the metal Dojo or Joe's History or any other accessory like that where it's metal, we get the conductive heat of that metal directly transferring energy into our gaskets, and often it sometimes can melt that bond and cause our gasket to become unstuck. I'm a big fan of my Joe's History and the Dojo, but this is one part that I wish didn't subject ourselves to a little bit of extra maintenance. But given that it's happened, I'm going to walk you through how to repair it and get ourselves back to grilling in no time. Let's move a little bit closer, start our repair process. So we don't need much in the way of tools, but I've got some paper towel just in case we get any dripping silicone. Want to be able to stop that before it falls into our Kamado or onto the patio. I've got some silicone gloves just to, again, keep this off of the skin, but any glove will do for that matter. We've got our high heat silicone. A lot of people use something like Permatex Gold. This is one that actually came with my replacement gasket kit when I've had to do a complete fresh install, so I've still got plenty of this left over, so that's the plan I'm going to use this. But they all share, again, in common about that 300 degrees Celsius, 600 degrees Fahrenheit max rating. And then I've got some duct tape. The tape is really just to, again, help everything make sure that we stay perfectly centered and hold it on here and we don't have gravity pulling it down. It is much easier to replace your bottom gasket. And so when you have your top gasket fail, you have two options: to do what I'm going to do today, or to use your airlift hinge disengagement tool, completely remove the band, put a towel inside of your base, and then flip the dome upside down so that you can work on it the exact same way that we would on the bottom. But that is much more involved than doing this. And so once you've done that once maybe in your life, you might find yourself preferring to go with the method that I'm going to go with today. And so since we haven't cooked with our gasket, we haven't had any shrinking, so I'm not going to have any difficulty getting this to go back where I want it. So what I'm going to do is prepare a bunch of small duct tape pieces so that I don't have to be reaching for this and doing this prep work once we're working with fresh silicone. And so I tend to just get pieces about 4 inches in size, rip in half, and I'm going to place a bunch of these nearby so that I have them at fingers width, and I'm able to grab them very easy. I'll take a fast forward while I get these ready. Okay, so now that we've got a bunch of tape ready, we can get to work with our silicone. And so again, we're gonna do the other half after we get the first half on. It's much easier doing half at a time, which is why I've tried to stop it from falling any further. So we'll do this half, get everything secured, and then we'll tackle, if we need to, the other half. So I'm just gonna start by applying a bead of silicone. Okay, that looks good. I'm doing about a foot section at a time. And so what I'm gonna do is just help place this where it should be, aligned to our dome, and start using some of that tape to hold it in place so it doesn't move around too much on me. Again, if we don't do this, we'll start to get some sliding and get some of that glue up inside of our dome. And we'll continue along here on the back side, work our way back up to the top. So now we can see just how much glue we had left on the other side. And right here, this is about to fall off next. Actually adhering pretty well down here. Let's run our finger along. So I think our problem area is only right here. So I'm just gonna get a little bit more silicone and do this last little bit. And again, I'm pulling and that is really well adhered. So I think I'm only gonna concentrate on this last foot section. Okay, now we're gonna close and latch our dome for 24 hours. That's the preliminary cure. After 24 hours, we're gonna do remove the tape and we're gonna do some temperature to help really make sure that our cure is fully set. Okay, it's been 24 hours and it's time to move on to the second part of curing our gasket to make sure that it adheres properly and we don't find ourselves repeating this exact same process in the not too distant future. Let's get nice and close. We're gonna start by removing our tape. All right, open up our Big Joe. We're gonna start pulling off the tape. Now again, I am gonna support it with my finger each time, just to make sure that by removing the tape, we don't end up putting any extra unnecessary pressure to start to separate that seal that we just did. But everything should come off nice and easy. I'll take you fast forward while we remove all our duct tape. Drop in a little charcoal. Grab our Grow Blazer grow gun. Fire that up. Close our dome. I'm going to set our control tower top to the 4th line, so as far open as I can get in the closed position versus being swung open. And that should bring us up to about 450 degrees. I'm going to let that run for about an hour. And then we're going to close the bottom vent and then close our top vent completely and let this sit overnight with that retained heat to help really make sure that our gasket is completely sealed overnight. So it is now 2 hours later. I know I said about an hour, got distracted here on the weekend doing a couple other things. So I've now shut our vents. The dome is reading about 300 degrees Fahrenheit, still with a lot of energy trapped in. And I'm seeing about 164 degrees ambient temperature on the outside of the ceramic. So this is plenty of heat to help cure our glue. We're going to leave this overnight so it completely cools off and cures. Normally when I'm done cooking and the fire's out, I unlatch the grill, but today we're going to let this go overnight. So now that we've done all of the hard work, let's talk about some prevention things that we can do to help mitigate the risk of this happening again in the future. So there's a couple of common things that can accelerate the wear and tear on our gasket and potentially get us to the point where we need to order a brand new replacement kit, which I have, but I am deliberately trying to not install that here because this is adding another couple $100 in local currency of cost, and I want to get as much mileage out of the gasket, especially since it was working perfectly fine other than falling off. So what are some of those issues? Well, rain and particularly snow and ice is a common culprit, particularly ice, as that tends to expand. If your gasket has gotten wet and the ice is causing it to expand, it can be technically pulling it and ripping it off of that seal that it may have. So if you're not in a covered area like where I am, a cover is a good idea, as is reducing any sort of water, rain, or spills on your gasket that will accelerate that. Again, spills and high heat cooks and other things like that can sort of melt away the adhesion or the bond that you have in your silicone and accelerate yourself getting into a situation like I am where your gasket just falls off. The second culprit I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which was the one that got me, which is the Dojo. Now, I love the Dojo, but I often try and remember to use it on my Series 1 because the felt gaskets just don't seem as prone to falling off like the high heat gasket material on the Series 2 and the Series 3 is. For whatever reason, I run into a gasket falling off far more frequently with something like the high heat gasket, even though it's a much higher quality than the felt, which will burn up if it was exposed to any of that same heat. So when using your Dojo, what are a couple things that you can do that cause this problem but mitigate it, creating an actual problem? And so I didn't listen to my own rules here, particularly the last few, but starting with the basic ones is don't exceed the 700 degrees Fahrenheit rating. Not only will this start to maybe get too much heat and you can melt your gasket, this is also getting the Dojo so hot that the metal radiates energy directly into the gasket, and 700 degrees or higher tire is exceeding the 600 degrees Fahrenheit rating that we have for our gasket material, and this is just causing it to come unglued. There's also a whole bunch of other bad things that can happen for blowing past that 700 degrees. I won't bore you with today, but it includes things like your deflector stones falling out the bottom and melting the metal tabs that are holding them into place. So we don't want that. One of my little pet peeves of the Dojo that I'm not absolutely crazy for it is there's no way to turn off our fire when we are done and completely extinguish our coals. So whatever coals you have left, they're going to just burn up. This also introduces another problem where we are continuing to conduct heat in the Dojo and radiate that directly into our gaskets all night. So not only do we lose our coal, we have a lot of energy being radiated into our gaskets, which can cause them to loosen just like mine did. And the third issue that this causes is the Dojo, particularly on the Big Joe, the Dojo, the deflectors, and the pizza stone, they're quite heavy and they tend to flatten out and compress the gasket. And so if you have a pair of high heat gloves, maybe even a friend to help you, because again, you're removing hot components, you need a concrete area where there's an air gap. Don't set any hot ceramics on cold stones or granite or anything like that, as they will crack. But if you have an air gap and a safe area to set this down, this will do a couple things. It'll allow us to shut down our Joe normally and save our charcoal. It will also help with our gasket and reduce the amount of time that the gasket is being subject to that radiant energy from the Dojo itself, as well as the weight of the Dojo, the deflectors, and the pizza stones that are bearing down and trying to compress and permanently flatten them from something like what you get when it's brand new and you've got a ton of bounce compared to what my gasket is now at a couple years old. Anyways, if you find yourself in this situation, as you saw, it's not a big deal, but definitely prioritize fixing it versus cooking it, because the gasket will shrink up 100% and be non-salvageable, and you will be forking over the cash for a brand new gasket in short order. That's it for today, though. I'm James from Soaking Up Barbecue signing off, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.